Douglas Murray, good morning.
Good morning.
Is this, Douglas, is this another example, yet another example, as so many people are saying, of us giving financial and political support to a brutal thug, and then look what happens?
Well, to some extent, yes. But I think it's worth just bearing in mind a bit of history on this, if I can say so, which is to hark back a few decades to 1979, when another dictator, somebody who was undoubtedly a dictator,
the Shah of Iran,
ran that country in a way which was very unpleasing to a lot of people in the West and elsewhere who didn't like his undoubtedly unpleasant human rights record and so on. But what was in 1979, when the Shah was overthrown, expected by many people in the West and elsewhere to be a movement that was going to bring about a progressive reform in that country. Instead, of course, Iran was hurtled back historically, and we're in the terrible situation we're in with Iran today, funding terrorist groups and others around the world. So the situation actually got worse. I don't say this because this is inevitably what's going to happen with Egypt, because it isn't, but it's worth bearing in mind. Of course, all of us in this country and in others would hope that Egypt would be able to have a situation in which the people of Egypt, as with any other country, have a say in the way in which their country is run. It's the most basic right of people to take part in choosing their leaders. But the fear, which one of your callers mentioned earlier, is of course this fear that the most organized group in the first election would, in the case of Egypt, be the Muslim Brotherhood, and that therefore the people of Egypt would effectively have one vote once, is a very serious consideration. So this doesn't mean we should support dictators. Supporting dictators brings this country and others a lot of problems.
Those most, in other words, those most vocal at the moment in support of democracy would seek to abolish it.
Not necessarily, but some of them certainly would be. I mean, the Brotherhood have played a very careful hand so far in the protests in Egypt. But it's simply worth. I think one of the things that many people have learned from Iraq, among other things, has been the fact that we've got to remember, whatever happens in Egypt in the coming days, we have to remember that democracy is not merely the placing of a ballot. That's the greatest symbol of it, the greatest opportunity of it. But that democracy can only truly come about when the people genuinely have a fair and free choice of candidates, and then all the institution that can ensure that the institution of government is not taken advantage of. And these are very serious problems, but I mean, I just simply counsel that where democracy on its own is not the answer, but neither is it the enemy.
Naima, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to say it's really condescending for people, you know, especially in Britain or in America, to say, well, the Egyptian people, you know, don't understand exactly what they want. The people on the streets are chanting bread, reform, peace, okay? And I really think to actually make the Islamic Brotherhood the bogeyman is quite, what can I say? It plays into the hands of America. I don't know if you saw the WikiLeaks sentence. It was saying that United States is trying to topple Mubarak and support the opposition. So if they're going to support the opposition, who is it going to be? The Islamic Brotherhood, and they're going to do it all in behind the scenes.
There are many oppositions, I think, though.
If you look at Egypt, because Muslim Brotherhood didn't support the demonstrations. They didn't say let's go out. If you look at the situation, the people need reform. They need to have a voice, and I think everybody's losing sight of that.
If the Muslim Brotherhood were to gain power or have a huge influence on power, would that be?
No, I'm just trying to say, if you look at the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, in some parts they've been subservient to Mubarak. You know, they're very peaceful. They didn't even come out to demonstrations. They're very peaceful, loving kind of people. I'm not saying I'm supporting them, or I'm not.
Douglas Murray, peaceful, loving people.
No, all I'm saying is
the Muslim Brotherhood is is a fascist movement. It was created in the 1920s. It's been banned in Egypt for many years.
No, all I'm saying...
One second, Naima, I'll be right back with you. Douglas, carry on.
I just explained that the issue with this, I tried to be clear about this. I'm sorry if I wasn't. But what I said was that they've been playing a very careful game, which is that you're absolutely right. They weren't at the forefront of the protests. They have bided their time in them and jumped on them to a certain extent since they started. But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that what we should fear is that the legitimate and appropriate concern and expression of rage of the Egyptian people must not now be taken advantage of by any group, and let alone a fascist group like the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, I'm saying that the people in the streets need bread, reform, they need peace, and that's all they want. And you know, actors like the American actors using the Muslim Brotherhood is actually a devious way of getting, you know, making American policy reign supreme. And I think it's quite clear that might happen, you know.
Andrew in Leicester, a Coptic Christian, Egyptian of Christian origin. You're worried?
Yes, Nicky. Good morning, by the way, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah, basically it's this. I'm an Egyptian. I'm of Egyptian origin, British national, but of Egyptian origin, and we come from Coptic Christian background, so we're the indigenous Christian population over there. And this uncertainty of who's going to come in next is quite worrying, because if the next regime, will they be more extremist, or will they encourage more violence towards Christians? That's probably the main uncertainty. And if a group takes over by force, this could well be a problem. But if the Egyptians were given legitimate elections, I think that can be avoided.
Douglas Murray, what would the track record be of groups that you believe? I mean, you've called the Muslim Brotherhood a fascist group. Is that not sort of, you know, a rather loose use of the term?
No, I'm afraid in this particular case it's very precise. The Muslim Brotherhood, among other things, their leader, at the time Hassan al-Banna, welcomed the only Nazi war criminal to survive trial after the Second World War.
But isn't that like saying that? Isn't that like? Sorry. Isn't that like saying the Daily Mail's the only paper that supported Mosley? You know, back then.
No. I mean, it's a very specific claim. The Muslim Brotherhood was a Nazi organization in the 1940s. It's continued to be. There's a wonderful new book about this by Paul Berman, if you're interested, or any of your listeners. It is an extremist organization. It certainly isn't, Pache, your previous caller, in any way backed by America, who are very fearful of the Muslim Brotherhood, and appropriately. But on to your caller just now, this is an extremely important case. One of the stories that is least reported in the world today, it seems to me, is the terrible suffering of Christians in Egypt and other lands where they've been for millennia. And just to give you an example, I mean, when I was last in Egypt a few months ago, there had been a massacre of Christians again fairly recently. It was very interesting. The Egyptian press and the Egyptian government again and again gave out the message that actually this was an internal mistake. It wasn't anything to do with religion. It was to do with a feud between a couple of groups and so on. The Christians of Egypt have been appallingly treated and murdered and so on in recent decades. And it is a story which the West seems not to have been interested in. And I think your caller is right to be very fearful of what the Copts and other minorities in Egypt may go through if an Islamist movement comes into government there, because the Mubarak days would look good.
Okay, listen, thank you, Douglas. Douglas Murray, journalist, Northern Name. A very interesting call from you and Andrew in Leicester, the Egyptian of Christian origin. It's 9:49.